Long before Gwyneth Paltrow was selling youth in a serum, Spanish conquistadors were drinking Florida pond water and calling it eternal life. They didn't live forever, but they did launch a wellness trend so persistent, it still refuses to die. In 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon set off in search of something extraordinary, a spring that could smooth wrinkles, restore vigor, and leave your enemies whispering about your suspiciously radiant glow. It was, in essence, a medieval influencer's dream. What he found instead was Florida, sunburn, clouds of mosquitoes, and a lot of confused locals wondering why these Europeans kept drinking puddles with such enthusiasm. Still, the myth stuck, because if there's one force more enduring than scientific skepticism, it's humanity's deep, almost embarrassing desperation not to age. This is the kind of story you didn't know you needed, the moment mythology stopped making sense. Welcome to Sleepy Journeys, a gentle drift through the most mysterious tales ever told, designed to soothe your mind and quietly enchant it at the same time. I'm Jack, your mildly unhinged narrator for the evening, part storyteller, part dreamweaver, entirely unqualified to wield a magical sword. Each night, we wander softly through the strangest corners of legend, where time bends, rivers whisper, and occasionally someone drinks enchanted goat's milk and turns into a regrettably handsome statue. These stories were meant to explain the impossible, to ward off wrinkles and bad weather, and to give people a reason not to eat berries that glowed in the dark. Tonight, we wade knee-deep into one of the most enduring obsessions in human history: how to never age. From cursed springs to modern spa retreats, from conquistadors to cryotherapy pods, the dream of eternal youth flows through every age like a shimmering, slightly overpriced serum. So pull the covers high, let the candles flicker low, and allow the ancient stories to creep in, barefoot and slightly shimmering, just like the rest of us. And just before we fully drift off, if you're enjoying Sleepy Journeys, go ahead and tap follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're joining me on. That way, you won't miss any of our upcoming sleepy adventures. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us. Now, take a deep breath, feel the stress of the day melt like mist, and let's begin. Before satellite imaging, before compasses were reliable and travel insurance existed, maps were mostly just ambitions drawn in ink. The unknown was illustrated with dragons, the known was exaggerated for national pride, and the mythical was scribbled in for fun or funding. So, when word spread of an island named Bimini, whose waters could rewind the body like a pocket watch, cartographers did what they did best: they guessed. According to 16th century hearsay, Bimini was somewhere vaguely west of the Caribbean, near Florida. Its rumored fountain could erase your age, restore your strength, and cure whatever aches you were willing to admit. It was spoken of by indigenous communities in terms far subtler and more sacred than the conquistadors ever understood, and what began as a symbolic spring became, in European minds, a literal destination. Ponce de Leon, newly relieved of his governorship in Puerto Rico and eager to make headlines, latched onto the story like a myth-chasing startup founder. Whether he believed in the fountain is unclear. He might have just needed a good slogan for a land grab. But in 1513, he set sail with 3 ships, shaky coordinates, and the kind of optimism only available to men who hadn't yet seen a Florida summer. What he found was green, dense, flat, buzzing. Florida greeted him with an entourage of mosquitoes and heat so thick it could be folded. And yet, somewhere between the ferns and fever, Ponce believed he was close. The Spanish called the land La Florida, partly for the flowers, partly for morale. His men took to the swamps, following rivers inland. They bathed in brackish pools. They asked locals, the Calusa, the Tequesta, about springs of power. These conversations were strained. Most likely, mineral springs were mentioned, the kind that ease sore joints and quiet coughs. But through a fog of linguistic gaps and cultural projection, the message warped. Healing became eternal youth. A spring for aches became a fountain for immortality. And of course, the maps were updated accordingly. From then on, charts of the New World often included an unlabeled spring near the coast, sometimes with a flourish, sometimes just a quiet little curve near a mangrove. No matter how many times it failed to appear, the idea was never fully erased. Like a wine stain, the fountain had soaked in. And the mistake, it wasn't so much wrong as inevitable. After all, imagine being on that voyage. You've spent weeks at sea eating hardtack and praying for citrus. Your feet are wet. Your supplies are low. You land in a wetland that hums with insects and smells like wet leather. What do you write in your journal? Fetid disappointment? No, you write, "We have found it," because the human need to make it worth it often outweighs the truth. Especially when the alternative is admitting you've crossed an ocean for a swamp that may or may not be trying to kill you. And to his credit, Ponce kept going. Even after illness, injury, and growing resistance from the people whose land he was discovering, he pressed on. He was eventually wounded, fatally, during a skirmish with the Calusa. He died in Havana, having found no fountain, but earning eternal life in the footnotes of a myth. So yes, the maps were wrong. Wildly so. But the desire that filled those empty corners, that part was painfully accurate. Because the truth was never about Florida, or maps, or even water. It was about people desperately drawing something hopeful where they didn't yet understand the edges. And to this day, we do the same. If you've ever tried to read the ingredients list on a modern anti-aging serum and felt like you'd accidentally opened a wizard's spellbook, then you'll understand the ancient problem. For centuries, no one quite knew what the fountain of youth contained, only that it was wet, mildly enchanted, and definitely not tap water. Across cultures, descriptions of youth-giving springs share common features. They're usually hidden in caves, surrounded by natural beauty, and often guarded by something cryptic, either an immortal, a sphinx-like beast, or a cryptic set of rules that feels like a game show hosted by time itself. In Persian and Islamic mythology, the prophet Al-Khidr is said to have discovered a spring of life while traveling with Alexander the Great. But this wasn't a casual roadside sip. The water was tucked deep beneath darkness, accessible only through divine guidance. The spring didn't bubble invitingly, it lurked. And those who sought it had to answer riddles, pass trials, and walk where sunlight dared not follow. Similarly, in medieval tales from Europe, miracle waters were often found by the pure of heart or the spectacularly persistent. There are tales of knights who bathed in springs that healed their wounds, not because of pH balance or volcanic minerals, but because the water had been blessed by saints, fairies, or very well-behaved fish. These weren't just natural features, they were moral tests with splash zones. And in some Chinese legends, the secret to eternal life didn't flow from the earth, but dripped from dew, collected on sacred mountain herbs at dawn. Entire alchemical treatises were written on the subject. They included diagrams, lunar calendars, and recipes that would make a modern pharmacist cry. Notably, many of these potions included mercury, a substance that, rather than extending life, tended to shorten it spectacularly. Therein lies the consistent contradiction. The very things people believed might preserve them often did the opposite. Yet hope persisted, like a stubborn rash from questionable spring water. Part of the allure lay in the ritual, the sacred pilgrimage, the cryptic guardian. It made youth feel earned, even when it came from licking moss on a Tuesday morning. Modern equivalents aren't so different. Today's sacred springs are high-end wellness clinics tucked into alpine villages or Balinese retreats, where purification comes not from fairies, but from infrared saunas and jade-infused hydration protocols. You still need a map. You still need guidance. Only now, it costs extra to upgrade your towel. And perhaps that's the real secret ingredient, not the minerals or magic, but the effort. The belief that through trial and discomfort, youth can be recaptured. Not bottled, exactly, but teased back into the bones like warmth after frost. Whether in a cave or a clinic, the formula remains elusive, but the ritual, that part we've never given up. If history has taught us anything, it's that people will drink almost anything if you tell them it adds 3 years to their life. Especially if it's difficult to pronounce and smells like old coins. In the earliest centuries of alchemy, recipes for eternal youth read more like dares than treatments. You had the usual sacred springs and herbal infusions, but also concoctions involving gold flakes, mercury, bat wings, human hair, opium, and whatever was left in the temple basement after a particularly messy ritual. The idea was simple. If something was rare, expensive, or dangerous, it was probably closer to divinity. Flavor was a secondary concern. Take, for example, the Chinese tradition of Dan, or elixir alchemy. This involved carefully combining cinnabar, mercury sulfide, jade powder, mica, and sometimes realgar, which, just to clarify, is arsenic. The mixture was believed to transform the body, elevate the spirit, and perhaps unstick your soul from the burden of mortality. In reality, it mostly transformed people into cautionary tales with alarming autopsy reports. In ancient India, Ayurvedic rejuvenation practices included rasayana therapy, tonics made from honey, ghee, herbs like ashwagandha, and occasionally precious metals prepared through purification rituals. These were more sustainable, but still involved weeks of preparation, dietary restrictions, and a firm belief in the body's ability to digest something formerly used in pocket change. In Europe, aging aristocrats became fans of spa waters, mineral-rich spring sources that promised purification and long life. Many were located in places like Bath, Baden-Baden, and Spa, yes, the town that became a noun. The waters often smelled like rotten eggs and left a metallic aftertaste, but they were prescribed liberally by doctors whose only other treatment option was leeches. It was considered fashionable, even noble, to smell faintly of volcanic rock and sink slowly into tepid healing. Some recipes drifted even further from palatability. A few medieval apothecaries advocated the use of mummy powder, a crushed concoction allegedly made from ancient Egyptian remains. This deeply macabre trend was believed to transfer the ancient body's preserved vitality to the living. In reality, it transferred disease, guilt, and at least one lawsuit from beyond the grave. And then there's the blood thing. Tales from various cultures toyed with the idea that youth could be absorbed, quite literally, from the young. While many of these stories are metaphorical, some historical figures dabbled in blood-based remedies, including Hungarian Countess Elizabeth Bathory, whose infamous reputation for bathing in virgin's blood has been widely exaggerated, but tells you everything about where the folklore was headed. Fast forward a few centuries, and blood-based longevity has made a modern comeback. In Silicon Valley's more experimental corners, plasma transfusions from younger donors have been explored as potential anti-aging treatments. It's a method that's equal parts clinical trial and vampire-themed startup pitch. So, whether it's a potion, a smoothie, or a drip bag, the message has always been the same. Youth doesn't come cheap. Not in ingredients, not in ethics, and certainly not in taste. Every myth has its main characters, but the Fountain of Youth has an unusual cast: explorers, monks, bath enthusiasts, and at least one man who just really enjoyed lying in hot water. One of the earliest recorded figures to claim rejuvenation came from the writings of Herodotus. He recounted tales of a fountain in the land of the Macrobians, a people who allegedly lived well past the age of 120. Their secret: a spring of sweet-tasting water and a diet of boiled meat and milk. While modern dietitians might raise an eyebrow at that menu, Herodotus seemed convinced that somewhere near the Horn of Africa, age was just an optional suggestion. In the Middle Ages, stories circulated of Eastern mystics who had found springs so pure they could reverse blindness, regrow hair, and smooth skin with the dedication of a medieval facialist. A monk named Roger Bacon, often cited as one of the earliest advocates of proto-scientific thinking, reportedly believed alchemy could lead to extended youth. He didn't exactly discover the fountain, but he insisted that with enough experimentation, it could be replicated. Bacon's early writings on rejuvenation eventually influenced Renaissance thinkers, most of whom preferred immortality served in chalices, ideally with gold trim. Then there were the saints. Hagiographies, the biographies of Christian saints, are peppered with miracle wells and sacred pools. St. Winfried's Well in Wales, for example, became a pilgrimage site where thousands sought healing, claiming that bathing in its waters could restore strength and stave off decline. Skeptics noted that it may have simply been clean and cold. Believers preferred to thank divine plumbing. In later centuries, local legends offered their own low-budget miracles. In parts of Eastern Europe, tales grew of women who had discovered secluded pools that kept them young for decades. Often these stories began with a woman of mysteriously youthful appearance and ended with her vanishing into the woods, leaving behind only the scent of herbs and mild regret. Perhaps the most folklorically tragic figure is the forever child. Appearing in many global traditions, this character stumbles upon the spring alone, drinks, bathes, or simply splashes, and remains frozen in time. At first, they're admired, then pitied, then studied. The tales often end with them wandering into the forest, tired of being asked what high school they go to. Not all claims were innocent. Charlatans throughout the 18th and 19th centuries cashed in on the fountain's mystique. Traveling tonic salesmen often touted their brews as youth restores, despite them being mostly grain alcohol, fruit juice, and a sprinkle of whatever sounded Latin. Some made fortunes. Others made headlines. All kept the myth alive, one bottle at a time. What unites these claimants, real and fictional, is not success, but conviction. That somehow, somewhere, they'd found the edge of time and taken a sip. And in a world where belief often bends reality, that sip was enough to keep the fountain flowing. The dream of eternal youth sounds like a spa commercial, serene, glowing, filled with light piano music and satisfied sighs. But myths have a habit of flipping the script. In tale after tale, the gift of agelessness comes with a brutal twist. You can't leave, you can't change, and you can't die. Greek mythology doesn't shy away from this. The story of Tithonus is one of the earliest cautionary tales about selective immortality. The dawn goddess Eos fell in love with the mortal prince and begged Zeus to grant him eternal life. He did, but she forgot to request eternal youth. As centuries passed, Tithonus withered into a fragile shell, too old to move, too alive to rest. Eventually, he shriveled into a cicada, all voice, no body, trapped in a chorus of longing. Other legends followed similar logic. In Slavic folklore, Koshai the Deathless cannot be killed because his soul is hidden inside a needle, inside an egg, inside a duck, inside a hare, inside a chest, buried beneath a tree on an island no one visits. He's immortal, yes, but spends eternity guarding his own complicated death like a paranoid librarian. It's less of a blessing and more of an unpaid internship with death anxiety. Even fairy tales get nervous around immortality. In the Japanese story of Urashima Taro, a fisherman rescues a turtle, is rewarded with a visit to an undersea palace, and stays there in bliss for what feels like days. When he returns to land, centuries have passed. His family is gone. His world is unrecognizable. He opens a magical box he was told never to open and instantly ages into dust. The lesson: timelessness has an expiration date. Modern fiction carries the same thread. Immortals in novels and movies often end up moody, melodramatic, and deeply bored. Vampires monologue. Demigods sulk. Time travelers become emotionally detached from every era they visit. The curse isn't just outliving others, it's outliving context. Watching the world move on without you, like a party where you're no longer on the guest list, but still refuse to leave. Today's longevity researchers rarely talk about these stories. They focus on cellular repair, genome stability, and the potential to extend life to 120, 150, or beyond. But even in those circles, the question lingers. If we remove aging, what happens to meaning? Would birthdays still matter? Would memories feel as sharp? Would grief lose its bite or its depth? Age gives narrative to life. It lets us trace change. It makes goodbyes meaningful. And while no one likes aching knees or surprise forehead lines, they remind us that we are, in fact, traveling forward, not stuck like old vinyl on a loop. So, the myth, in its roundabout way, leaves us with this. Immortality might cure wrinkles, but it won't fix loneliness, loss, or the existential weirdness of being forever 15 in a world that keeps moving on. If ancient springs were sacred, today's wellness routines are suspiciously well lit. We've traded mossy caves for minimalist lobbies and cryptic riddles for terms like glow cycle and detoxification journey. Yet the promise remains oddly familiar, a return to youth for a small monthly fee. Let's start with the modern spa. Not the hotel add-on with cucumber water and Enya. We're talking about the high-end wellness sanctuary that looks like it was designed by a skincare-obsessed architect with strong feelings about neutral palettes. These temples to rejuvenation often offer cryotherapy, infrared saunas, lymphatic drainage, and something involving tiny electrical pulses that make your face twitch like it's receiving divine messages. Cryotherapy is marketed as the modern version of bathing in mythic snowmelt. You step into a chamber that plunges to -200 degrees Fahrenheit. Your breath fogs, your eyelashes try to resign, and 3 minutes later, you're assured you've reversed 5 years of aging, or at least burned enough calories to justify your next oat milk affogato. It's cold, intense, and undeniably performative. Just like medieval rituals, but with better towels. Then there are the treatments that feel alchemical in their own way. Gold leaf facials, 24-hour fasting cleanses, injections of hyaluronic acid harvested from sources that sound faintly ominous. You'll find anti-aging serums featuring snail mucin, bee venom, volcanic ash, or mushroom extracts gathered by monks on moonless nights, or, more likely, factory workers in branded aprons. But the myth lives on, bottled, labeled, and stamped dermatologist tested. Wellness retreats have become the new pilgrimage sites. From Sedona to Switzerland, they promise the shedding of years through silence, fasting, deep breathing, and foot rubs that allegedly activate your pineal vortex. These rituals echo the mythic journey: travel far, suffer a bit, cleanse, emerge glowing. The real genius of the industry lies not in science, but storytelling. Just like the explorers of old, we crave a narrative. The potion, the trial, the transformation. We want to believe that somewhere between the IV drip and the green juice, we'll emerge reborn. That somewhere, hidden in the collagen, lies the glint of the old spring. Of course, most of these treatments are about maintenance, not miracles. But that doesn't mean they're fake. It just means they're not fountains, they're fog. A little shimmer, a little promise, a little peace in the ritual itself. And maybe that's the point. We're not trying to live forever. We're just trying to look a little less tired on the way. While the wellness world is exfoliating its way to youth, Silicon Valley is trying to outcode death. Longevity, once the domain of monks and mystics, has become a startup sector. Investors pour millions into biotech firms promising age reversal, cellular reprogramming, and the kind of immortality that doesn't come with a beard and a prophecy. Here, the fountain of youth doesn't bubble. It hums quietly from a server farm in Nevada. Let's start with the blood boy phenomenon. In the last decade, some longevity researchers have experimented with transfusing young blood into older bodies. The idea came from mouse studies. Older rodents showed signs of cellular rejuvenation when given the plasma of their youthful peers. Cue the emergence of highly funded clinical trials, and briefly, a boutique service offering infusions from healthy teens. It sounded like a horror movie written by a venture capitalist. Public backlash was swift. Ethical concerns were loud. But the research didn't stop. Now, plasma-based therapies are being refined with more nuance. Instead of direct transfusions, scientists isolate proteins thought to support tissue repair, memory function, and overall vitality. It's no longer called vampire treatment. It's biological optimization. The branding has evolved, even if the creepiness hasn't. Elsewhere in the tech world, people are trying to digitize the soul. Companies like Neuralink envision brain-machine interfaces that might one day allow us to upload consciousness, to preserve thought, memory, identity, in a digital echo of ourselves. Others, like Nectome, aim to preserve the brain physically in hopes of one day scanning it into a simulation. The concept is wild, morbid, and deeply mythic. Immortality not through water, but through data. Of course, this raises all kinds of questions. If your mind is uploaded, are you still you? Can a digital self feel nostalgia? Can it love, or does it just sit in a cloud server playing lo-fi beats and waiting for someone to log in? Then there's Brian Johnson, the tech mogul who famously set out to reduce his biological age using a regimen of over 100 daily pills, constant medical testing, and plasma transfusions from his teenage son. His routines include nightly infrared masks, shockwave therapy, and a lifestyle so optimized it makes monks look spontaneous. To his credit, some of the biomarkers do appear younger. To his critics, he's just extremely expensive evidence that death is still winning, slowly but smugly. Hollywood, of course, has always adored the myth. From cursed immortals to enchanted relics, the idea of cheating time has been a recurring plot twist, sometimes romantic, sometimes tragic, always glowing with soft lighting and surprisingly good hair. And today, the myth lives again, now in cinematic form. The recently released Apple TV Plus film Fountain of Youth offers its own shimmering take on the legend. Directed with glossy precision and starring John Krasinski and Natalie Portman, the story blends adventure with reflection, asking what we're really trying to preserve when we chase youth, beauty, relevance, or unfinished dreams. It's not the first retelling, and it won't be the last. But like the spring itself, it catches the light in a new way, just long enough to make you wonder. The myth was made for film. It's all longing and atmosphere. Mist, secrets, transformation. Perfectly timed for the screen, and just ambiguous enough to feel like it's saying something profound, even when it's just offering a better version of your reflection. And yet, behind the flash and funding, these attempts, however outlandish, carry the same impulse as Ponce de Leon wading through a Floridian bog. The hope that if you just try hard enough, drink enough potions, inject enough peptides, or upload your memories to the right cloud, you might get to see one more sunrise with smooth skin and no joint pain. It's the fountain, in code, and the thirst remains the same. If there's one thing myths agree on, it's that water remembers. It soothes, heals, and sometimes, if you believe hard enough, resets the clock. Across the globe, cultures have told tales of secret springs, enchanted wells, and sacred pools that whisper youth into weary bones. Each story reflects not just a longing for longevity, but a deep-rooted belief in the magic of place. And often, that magic is damp. In the Japanese countryside, nestled in misty valleys, are the onsen, hot springs fed by volcanic groundwater. While they're famed for their relaxing properties today, ancient beliefs gave them spiritual significance. Certain onsen were said to extend life, especially those enriched with sulfur or iron. One tale tells of a heron with a broken leg who bathed daily in a particular spring. When it healed, the villagers took notice, and the bathhouse legend was born. Today, some locals still say, if the heron returned, so can your youth. In Norse mythology, eternal youth didn't flow, it grew. The goddess Idun guarded a grove of golden apples that granted the Aesir gods their vigor. When the apples were stolen, as they inevitably were in such stories, the gods visibly aged, gray hair, creaking knees, diminished thunder. Only upon Idun's return did their power revive. The lesson was clear: youth is fragile and easily lost. Also, never let your magical fruit out of sight. In parts of West Africa, stories circulate of rivers that flow backward in time. One Yoruba myth describes a place where if you step in as an elder, you emerge as a child. But there's a catch. You forget everything. It's not just your body that resets, it's your story. These myths paint youth not as a gift, but as a trade. A reset button with fine print. You start over, yes, but you start alone. In Peru and Bolivia, high-altitude lakes were believed to contain powers of clarity, wisdom, and renewal. Pilgrimages to Lake Titicaca weren't just spiritual, they were cleansing. Elders would ritually wash their hands in silence, believing the lake had memory, and would absorb their age, carrying it away like a tide of years. It wasn't about vanishing wrinkles. It was about giving age back to the water, where it belonged. And then there are the fairy wells of Ireland, humble stone-ringed springs tucked into hillsides, often with rags tied to nearby trees. Wishes are whispered, coins tossed, hands dipped. They don't promise immortality, only comfort. A kind of spiritual pause button. A quiet, mossy nod to the idea that if you can't live forever, you can at least feel young for a moment, if the wind and water are right. These stories don't demand belief. They invite it. And sometimes, that's enough. The fountain of youth was never supposed to work. That might seem like an odd conclusion after centuries of desperate cartography, spiritual bathing, and extremely suspicious smoothies, but it makes a certain sense. The myth wasn't built to deliver. It was built to question. In many of the oldest versions, the fountain is always almost found. It's glimpsed, then lost. Tasted, but not finished. Guarded by impossible tasks or revealed too late. It's a riddle without an answer key, a myth that survives not by granting wishes, but by deferring them. And that's the brilliance of it. Because if eternal youth was actually obtainable, if there was a fountain you could drink from and never age again, the story would stop there. One person wins. Everyone else loses. The myth would ossify into history, the way fire became fact. But instead, it remains fluid, shifting, never pinned down. It invites generation after generation to take the journey for themselves and maybe learn something truer on the way. In this way, the fountain of youth functions less like a treasure and more like a mirror. When we search for it, what we're really seeking isn't perfect skin or infinite birthdays. We're searching for do-overs, for the chance to hold on to the best parts a little longer, to slow down the moments we'd otherwise rush through, and to undo, if possible, just one or two of the stranger haircut choices from our early 20s. In storytelling terms, the fountain is a classic trickster. It lures with clarity and delivers ambiguity. And it tends to ask quiet questions in return. What if aging isn't the enemy, but the evidence? What if youth is sweet because it ends? What if we stopped trying to stay the same and instead tried to soften into change? Even modern science, as ambitious and quantified as it is, can't answer those. At best, it offers delay. At worst, distraction. But mythology was never about fixing problems. It was about making meaning out of the problems we can't fix. Wrinkles, yes. Time, always. So maybe we were never meant to find the fountain. Maybe we were meant to walk toward it slowly, with curiosity, knowing it will always shimmer a few steps ahead, not to grant us forever, but to remind us that what we have is already rare, already finite, already precious. And that, sometimes, is enough. So here we are, not young forever, not old entirely, just resting somewhere in between. The search is over for tonight. The map's folded, the potion's corked, and the fountain, if it ever existed at all, remains untouched, quietly rippling in the dream space where myths like to hide. But don't rush away. Let's linger here a while, beside the water, as twilight curls around us like smoke from an unfamiliar incense. Breathe in the stillness. Feel the hush settle over your chest, where the story's gathered. Let the images drift back, softened now by distance, like candlelight behind silk. Can you see it? The glade where the stream begins, moss-coated stones, soft as felt. Ferns leaning toward you, conspiratorial. Somewhere nearby, a nightbird sings one long note. The moon, indecisive, balances just above the treetops, casting silver threads across the surface of the spring. The water here is slow, ancient. It remembers everything, but tells nothing. Dip your fingers in. It's warm, like tea or memory. The surface accepts you, then forgets you. A perfect kindness. Imagine sitting here, bare feet in the current. You're not searching anymore. You're not aging. You're just here. Timeless not in body, but in breath. Maybe that's all the fountain was ever meant to be. Not a miracle, but a mirror. Not a cure, but a pause. A quiet moment between what was and what will be, where you can simply float, undisturbed by clocks or calendars or collagen statistics. You might stay here for a moment, or longer. The trees don't mind. They've watched many seekers arrive, and most forget to leave. They grow around the still ones, wrapping roots gently over sleeping ankles, not to trap, but to keep warm. Let your muscles soften. Let your eyes close. There's no rush. No one's waiting for you on the other side of this spring. Not yet. Here, you are as old as starlight, and as new as dew. Thank you for joining me on tonight's journey. The Fountain of Youth may have been a myth, but the desire behind it, to hold time gently, to feel ageless just for a breath, is very real. And maybe, in some way, we've touched it tonight. Not through miracle water or medieval maps, but through memory, story, and stillness. So, as you drift now, into dreams or rest, or just a deeper quiet, know that the story doesn't need to end. It can continue quietly in your thoughts, in the way your breath slows, in the soft rhythm of your heartbeat, like footsteps echoing back from a place long gone. Perhaps you'll dream of the fountain, or of the maps that led to it, or of a spring that offers not youth, but peace, deep, mossy, and full of stars. And if you do, I hope it finds you well. Until next time, sweet dreams.